This is Farm Next, and I am your host, Sarah Beth Aubrey, the author of Who's Running Your Farm Next? 5 Steps to Develop and Coach Your Next Generation, and the founder of Elevate Ag, the peer innovation network. This is the podcast where we talk about in agriculture what we don't often want to talk about in agriculture, the people side of the business, the challenges, the joys, and the rewards of working with family and those around us in our communities in agriculture. But we're here to talk about how to make your future successful and how to have the creative conversations that get the job done to get us to the next generation. So now let's start the conversation. Hi there, everybody, and welcome to the Farm Next podcast. And I'm going to start off today. This is just episode 3, but I want to lead off with a big, kind of a heavy hitter statement that I think some of you will really resonate with. And that is, in less than 5 years, your farm will be very different than it is today. You may not be the one in charge. How does that sit with some of you? I led off with that line in my book, and my publisher said, it's too gloomy, it's too negative, it sounds ominous, don't do it. And I don't think it's ominous. I think it's realistic. It's what agriculture in all segments of the business looks like today. We are an industry changing fast, and many of us are doing a great job keeping up, and many of us are also just not even sure where to turn next. Both of those things may be happening to you at the same time. You may be thinking, I'm really adding technology, I'm really keeping up with innovation, I'm adding the different tools, but I don't know who's going to take over this place when I'm ready to retire or if something happens. And that's kind of the yin and yang, the two-sided coin of where we are in this industry. A lot of change happening fast. And I don't think it's an ominous statement. I think your operation will be very, very different than it is today. So in today's show, and actually going forward for the next few weeks, we're going to talk about some foundational shifts. So as you know, from listening to me the last couple of weeks, as well if we're personally acquainted or through the live show where I'm doing some training, I've been a consultant for a long time in the ag sector, and of course grew up in the grain and livestock side of things. My husband and I still raise cattle here. So I'm a solutions provider. That's what I've been paid to do for 20 years, whether it's with a client or with a company that is, or with my private clients that I've had, since I started my business in 2004. So I've been a solutions provider. That's what I get paid to do. And I'm still doing that. I still want to do that. Yet when I really decided to start thinking about what's the next iteration of what I need to provide as a thought leader, I hope, in this industry and a solutions provider. And sometimes I think we jump ahead to implementation when we're still in a phase where we're trying to figure out where we need to go and why. And so that's what I want to do with the podcast series here for the next handful of weeks. I think if we look at the calendar, this is going to come out in the last week of October, I believe. And I think as we look at the calendar, this will take us through around early December. So as you're finishing up harvest, or you're finishing up with that fall calving season, or hopefully you're starting to think about the new year and what that looks like, I hope this foundational series is a good place for you to begin just thinking about what's going on. Turn off that yield monitor and get out and, turn over a few rocks here with me the next 6 weeks as we go through this series that is going to be less about the tips and the how-to, which is kind of my bailiwick. I like many of you in ag, we're doers. We see something, we're like, okay, let's get it done. Let's fix it. And I'm on board with that. But I want to pause and ask you to work harder with me strategically. And to do that, I want to start out by sharing what I see as a lot of and I've got 6, I guess, not a lot, the fundamental shifts that are affecting us in agriculture, that some of these are affecting us right now. Some of these will be affecting your individual operations very soon. Some of these things you've been ignoring possibly, and there's shifts out there that might be affecting you or are going to, but you've kind of been like, whatever, that's for other people. I don't think any of these are for other people. And where do we need to go? This is the place where I started my book, just to be a place of, okay, we're on a fault line here. Ag's changing. Where do we go from here? But let's accept some reality. It's kind of like weight loss. The very first day you lose weight is the first day you finally step on the darn scale and accept where you are. And that's kind of where it is with, frankly, any change and or any just improvement. Maybe you've got a great business model and you've got a lot of stuff that's set up in the right direction, but there's always room for improvement, and there's always a constant need to manage performance. If you're in a great place, that's a precarious spot as well, because that's the place where if you get lazy or you stop looking, things don't continue to go as well. Performance and professional and personal growth and sustainability are not a done job. They're never done. They can be in a good maintenance position. They can be something that you feel confident about, that you can go out and continue to do your work and not feel stressed about. And that's where I hope to get all of you who listen to me and potentially become clients through the new online programs that I'm going to be rolling out to you in the very, very soon time frame. But if you're not there yet, or even if you are just looking to kind of think about, okay, what's the state of the state? Where am I now? I want to share these fundamentals with you over the next few weeks. So I've got 6 of them. I'm calling them the fundamental shifts affecting the future of ag. And we're going to start this week with 1 here in just a couple minutes. And I'll go through those with you throughout the week, or throughout the coming weeks, I should say. So you'll want to subscribe. So the podcast is brand new as you are listening to this. So it does take a few days to get it all loaded up on the iTunes, the Google Play. I think Spotify picks us up almost immediately, maybe within a day. Now we'll release these episodes to you on the email. So if you're not on my weekly blog, if you like to receive email with curated content, shoot us a note to get on my blog. So obviously the show will tell you when the show's coming out on the blog, and it'll have a link and all that handy stuff. If you like to just follow me on social media, obviously the day the show goes live, we'll drop that into the various social media accounts so you can click link, listen, yay. But if you are a podcast listener, as I am, some of my favorite shows, I really like to get those notifications. So those, of course, if you're familiar with podcast listening, and everybody now is, it seems like, you can subscribe to us, and we'll have more information about how to do that in the show notes. And as we just get better at using this medium and figuring out how to distribute it, and then you'll have that opportunity. So, but if you are interested in this topic, the fundamental shifts and how it really fits, I urge you to subscribe in some way, whether it's on the email blog where you're going to get these, emailed to you, or with the podcast app of your choice that sends you an update, because this is going to be a 6-week series, and we're going to dig into these. And at the end of that series is where we're going to start really looking at, okay, and I'm going to challenge you, what are the solutions? And that's going to be our discussion forum topics. You've heard my 6 shifts. I bet you have your own version of those, and that is very important that you do. I invite you to challenge these, or also just to add to them or put them in your own perspective for your own business, where they're reality, where they're actually something that's legitimate for you. But once we get through these, we're around that, early December timeframe, we're going to shift into that. The future's now. It's time for a solution. What do we want to do? And how can I help? So we'll be getting there. Bear with me as we go through the reflective process. Not one of my strong suits, honestly. I like to jump in and, okay, let's get the project going. Let's see what we got to do. And keep those notes. If you're a person who really, if this resonates with, keep those notes, jot them down, be kind of collecting that information, but go ahead and take some time to reflect. So let's talk about today as we shift. And the fundamental shifts are important for one major question. Will your operation make it to 2050? Or which is another generation from now, so to speak. And that's kind of a whole cycle. If you look at the old way of calculating generations, which has really gotten abbreviated in the last few, because we now tend to look at generations shifting less on the number of years, which was kind of how organizations calculated that before, and it's been more on the changes in the shifts and things like technology use that create these fundamental changes in how people operate and live. But if you think about 2050, it's almost 2020. That's 30 years. That's a very long time. Many of us we may be here, we may not, but is our operation going to be there? And do you expect it to be there? And if so, these shifts, I think, are things to identify to start teeing up. Where are we at with that? What changes do we need to acknowledge with that? So, your knowledge of these things and your ability to adapt is what will tee you up to be able to be there. So, in this big six group, and I'm going to start with number one here in just a couple minutes. In this big six group, these aren't just statistics, although I will have some statistics in there. Now, that is not my gift. Now, these are statistics that we can all easily grab, but that's what makes them so powerful. They're not a joke. They're not just someone guessing. These are numbers that organizations are surveying and collecting, and you can believe them or not, but they're out there and they're real. So I'm not a statistics person. I tend to work a lot more by my intuition and how I read the room, but that's because I work with people. And stats don't necessarily excite people when they're in the heat of a conversation that's challenging. However, when we're in a contemplative phase, like I'm asking you to consider doing right now, looking at the facts can be sobering and compelling. And so I do throw out some numbers to you for your consideration, some of which we're so familiar with in our daily verbiage that it may not even seem like they matter. But when you start to put them into a line, you kind of have to go, oh, that's 5 or 6 items that I probably ought to pay attention to. And how do I make that relevant for my business and for my family or for the agribusiness I operate? So there are, for each of these, though, exciting opportunities. And that's why this section in this next 6 weeks is not about negativity. I do want you to enjoy these podcasts. I want to share with you opportunities just as much as I want to share with you some concerns. Because for every one of these shifts and every time something changes, a silver lining emerges immediately as well. So there is something that is a chance for your business to capitalize on with these inevitable changes within each one. And that's where, when we begin to shift to that solution time, I'm hoping that you will have looked at these things, added them up for your business, and said, okay, the silver lining for me is this. Now, what do we do? So why don't we begin and spend the next few minutes during this podcast time together really looking at what I consider the first of the big 6, these fundamental shifts. So the first one is, we're just going to jump in. And again, I'm going to cover the rest of them throughout the next 6 sessions. But the first one is a massive transition in the current leadership in agriculture, and that's at the farm gate. That's also in agribusiness and in industry and in land. And that can be ownership of land as well as stewardship, or shall I say, management of those ag acres. So these are both happening, oddly enough, and maybe it's not odd, but they're happening simultaneously. And here is why they are important. Let's just start out with the one that we've all heard so darn many times that we use it as a quote without a citation. It's almost like all trailers are a gooseneck, and all, paper that we wipe our nose with is a Kleenex. We've heard this fact so darn much that we just don't even hardly care. But when you start to add this up in a line with where I'm headed with these other 5 or 6 for today, you kind of have to go, is that me? And for many of you listening, or for many of you whose parents are on the other side of this, or whose children are on the side of this, it probably is you. And it's such an important statistic because it's just so common. It reflects so many of us. What is it? Well, commonly known, USDA Census of Ag tells us that agricultural producers' average age is around 57 and a half. That's from the 2017 census in ag. That's our most recent census. But that number has, no surprise, also gone up by a year or two in age since the census before that, which was 2012. So within that 5 year time frame, people just got older and stayed in the business. So what does that mean? Does that mean that nothing really shifted? Or does that mean that most people stayed the same? I don't know. I'm not here to analyze the data. I'm here to put it out there for your perceptions and for your use to make it your own, relevant to you. But the fact is, we know we are an industry where the leaders, now that doesn't mean that we're all 57, I'm not, but the many of the leaders that I look up to, that I've worked with, that are my clients, that is in my family, in the ag sector, that I work with in agribusiness, who are the ones that taught me 20 years ago when I got into the industry, they're in that number. And guess what? A lot of them are thinking about retirement. And when that happens very highly at the same amount of time, you get a massive shift, because not only our industry leaders, our agribusiness professionals, our trade association execs, our thought leaders at the in our favorite academic institutions, they're the same age, many of them, as that average grower age that we just cited, around 58. That means that we're transitioning leadership at all levels, up and down in the industry, and a bunch of us are going to transition at the same time. So let's just kind of dig into this even more. Also, good friends at USDA putting out here that principal operators, that numbers, or that little tidbit's interesting, because many of us hear some of these statistics and kind of poo-poo them because of the size of the farm, may not be relevant to what you are. But principal operator means that they are engaged. So they're not just a landowner here, okay? They're not your landlord that you're renting from. The principal operator statistic means these are people who are farming. They consider themselves actively engaged in the production process. So that number, though, is even higher. 65 is the age that they consider the average. So, so you're thinking, okay, so people, as they get older, we've got concerns like declining agility, or it's difficult to perform physical tasks, so we're going to have to deal with those things. Sure, that's true. Although people have a lot of different tools that can help them navigate those challenges the way they didn't a generation or two ago. But that's not the concern that I'm digging into with you guys here. My concern, and what I want you to consider, again, not just at your farm, but also in your business that you work with, your suppliers that you talk to. The concern I have is the knowledge transfer. Or let's just say the knowledge transfer, or the lack of it, if we fail to transfer it. We've got strong leadership, seasons under our belts. Those individuals are going to make changes because of their stage of life. Are we good about transferring the knowledge? But here's a couple things that you really need to think about. So why is knowledge transfer so important? Oh, fine. I already know, I already know how to farm. It's fine if I don't collect all this information from the older generation. I've worked with them for 20 years. I know what they know. Really though? When I dig in our peer group meetings in Elevate Ag, at the conversations about who handles what, and that's really the piece. And we're going to cover roles and what job descriptions, and really ask leaders at all levels to describe, what do I really handle and what do I not handling that I might need to be. That's where you get into the nitty gritty, but we're not doing that today. This series is about where are we today, not where can we change. Don't worry, I'm up for getting there with you. We think that stereotypically, and this is me going there, okay, but younger growers may have a better handle on critical operational aspects going forward into the future, like technology adoption. That's stereotypical. I know plenty of growers in those 57.2 age range that are really strong on technology. So I don't think that's across the board, but that's what we kind of tend to think. We tend to think, okay, well, let's get the apps and let's assign that to the, to the new guy, or the girl that just got out of college. Let's have her, run the new facility there. She's going to be able to do it off her phone. Sure, that's a stereotypical fact that we've tended to accept, but that's not. And so people who think, well, I've already know how to do that. I'm younger. I'm running that stuff. We don't need that older generation. I completely disagree, because here are some of the areas where Also stereotypically, but again, just drawing from my experience working with lots and lots of growers through the peer groups and the consulting practices, here's where most of the time that knowledge, the contacts lies with those producers that are in that upper age range. These are some big ones. They tend to be the people who have the local knowledge. They tend to have the people with the long-term relationships with suppliers, with community people, with even executives and trade associations, local politicians, perhaps regulatory organizations. These are the other, and I've got one more. The third one that is really important, that typically the upper end of that knowledge transfer is so concerning, is that they also typically tend to be the person who manages the relationship with the landholder. If many of you are renting facilities for your livestock on contract with those, or of course, renting or sharecropping in some manner of your production acres, we tend to see that most of the relationships with those landholders are with the senior leader in the business. Now, if you believe the facts that that senior leader is going to be interested, is around 58 to 65 years old today, and may, want to do something else besides only farm until they, return to their heavenly reward. Some don't, but a lot of people would like to retire. If you believe that, if that's your operation, and the local knowledge, the good long-term relationships, and the critical relationships with the people who supply you the ground or the facility to operate on lie with those people, what are you doing about it? And that's where this massive transition and shift in land use and leadership, and by leadership, I mean the people that are in these roles. This is where operations have to come together and have the conversation about transitioning that. Let's keep going. So AgriPulse tells us that in a 10 to 20 year period that's going to end in the 2030s, which PSBTW is 10 years away, around 370 million acres of ag land will change hands. Now, you layer that over what USDA wants to tell us, that back to those farmers that are 65 and older, they control a lot of the land today. According to USDA, it's around 320 million acres is controlled, managed by that grower in that 65 plus range. And all of you are sitting there going, yeah, duh, I know that. And you do. It's probably more, it's somewhere over a third of the ag land in the US today. So we've got some pretty significant factors. Change is happening. So let's just look at the really easy, obvious one. If people over 65 control a big chunk of the land right now, 320 million acres according to USDA, and around 370 of that is probably going to change hands just due to, life factors, age, people getting out of the business, people wanting to retire. And that's going to happen within less than 10 years. And also those same pool of individuals largely manage, control, and have the contacts and the relationships with the landholders. This becomes a pretty big topic. So I will tend to challenge my younger producers, and by young, and young in agriculture is a pretty broad number. That for somebody who's in college, young seems like somebody who's 25. For somebody who's already 45, young still feels 45. And that's the truth though. If your dad or grandpa or your mom or your aunt's primarily the one who controls the relationships with the landholders, and you've really not started getting together with them, meeting them, or frankly having their kids and their attorneys' phone numbers and going to visit them and calling on them, you're in trouble. These facts are your facts, if that's your case. You have time to change it, which is the silver lining that I'm about to get to here, is that there is an opportunity as long as you recognize the situation. Now, let's say you're getting ready to retire, or you'd kind of like to, or you're thinking even within the next 10 years. You're going to have a lot of company. Florida or wherever is going to be very darn busy, or wherever people want to retire in 10 years. That's where my grandparents were snowbirds for my entire childhood and up until the last 2 years. when they decided to stop traveling down there. They're in their mid 90s. So, but I mean, you're going to be pretty, it's going to get full, I guess, because USDA further wants to estimate for us that again, around 2030, all these numbers are in that up around 10 years time frame from now. Have you noticed that? About up to 500,000 farmers are going to retire or otherwise be out of the business. That is staggering. What that means is a fundamental shift, doesn't it? And so we're talking to an ag com major here. I am not an economist and I'm not a statistician. Those of you who are in econ, you want to write me and tell me I didn't handle these correctly. That's fine. I make no claims that I do. All I did is what anybody could do that does not even have that background. I looked at the articles. I looked at the stats that are published on these organizations' websites. And I stacked them all up and said, oh boy, time's now. So I'm here, again, not coming to you as an economist to assess these. You can find people that can do that far better than I. But I am coming to you here as the leader of this Farm Next movement, a person who grew up on a grain and livestock farm and has a family who still farms, though my parents do not, and who has been a consultant in the ag industry dealing directly with the agribusiness suppliers who supply the farm operations for 20 years. And the time's now. So the first shift in the silver lining is that with these changes create a massive well of opportunity, doesn't it? And so for those of you who plan to have your operation head to 2050, or you want to grow, you want to expand, or you want to make some kinds of changes along the way, the doors are flying wide open. And they're flying open so darn fast that some of you aren't even going to be able to keep up. And yet planning will help you to do that. So what's also neat is that the next generation of leadership, whatever age that is, and I don't care about the age number. Age numbers are really irrelevant in today's leadership circles, to be honest. They used to be sort of, you want to accomplish this in your 20s, you want to accomplish this in your 30s, you want to accomplish this in your 40s, and that's baloney. It's really about, kind of the stage of life you're in and what you're, where you're headed with things and the opportunities that you can capitalize on and how they make sense for you financially, with your family, where you are with, helping to care for other adults and all those kinds of things. So age isn't so much a factor in that as it was, but let's think about this. If you're the next generation leader, whatever number that is on your birthday, the silver lining for this shift is that you're ready to come into your own. Your turn is coming right up, ladies and gentlemen. And yet, you still need the guidance of your forebears. And if that forebearer is still with you, maybe is still the leader in the operation, take the lead on the conversations and the planning now. And if you need a little help on that, listen to my last episode, which was about managing up and how you, as the second or third generation leader in the business, you may not be the first seat today, that our first chair. I was in band a long time ago, and the first chair was kind of the, what did you call that? That was kind of the, I guess, the leader, maybe the top shelf player, maybe considered the best, or maybe just had the best leadership skills, whatever. If you're not that person today, you can still manage up to make sure that the discussion around this topic happens and that you can be leading this topic or getting it on the table, because it sure matters to you, doesn't it? And it matters to your family as well and where the business goes. And that's why these facts are relevant for all of us. And that's why they're fundamental shifts and not just stats, I guess, is really where I would leave you with this. Is it's time to take time to ensure that the valuable knowledge and experience and contacts and relationships, we are putting those very precious assets into the right hands and considering them business assets. And that's what I'd like to ask you to think about with this first fundamental shift. And that is about the massive transition in leadership and land. So take a look at the way that you haven't looked at this for a while, or have just kind of considered it a thing floating over here, and it's really affecting all of us. So I encourage you to write me with your questions or comments, and I'm excited to hear more about what you have to say and how you're doing. So take a look at the show notes. Don't forget to join us in the Facebook group Farm Next. You can sign up on my blog at sarahbethaubrey.com. And stay tuned for a couple amazing editions that we're going to have for some sales and deals for you. So I welcome your comments, your questions. Don't forget the live show Thursdays. See you next week, and I will talk with you soon. And one last thing before you go for the day, I want to personally invite you to come on over to the Farm Next Facebook community. Why would you join this? Well, this is a community of those of us in agriculture who are interested in developing and coaching the next generation of leaders. It's where things like this podcast, the live show that I do every Thursday with the free training on a topic, get their house. It's where they live. It's where you can always grab the extra versions of those and where you can take advantage of the conversation and the community. We'll also be making you some really interesting offers in that group to take advantage of programs that may benefit you. And they will be exclusive right there in the group. So come on over, look for Farm Next on Facebook and ask to join. I'll see you there.